Well, hello there. Happy Thursday, happy sketch session day. I'm laughing because I see the comments in the chat about you guys already having a soundtrack going on, which is awesome. I wish I could have some music going, but I think it would make the sound quality really bad. So I hope you're ready for some piggies. I was really having a fun time assembling all the different images, so be prepared to smile. There's some really cute ones, and I will promise we'll learn a lot too. If you're finding the sketch session for the very first time and you haven't drawn with us before, my name is Carolyn and I'm the owner of Kira Studios, where I teach classical drawing skills so artists can build a very solid foundation to explore their creative voice from. And every Thursday we get together here and we have some fun. It's about an hour long, usually a little bit longer than an hour, where we rotate subject matter and we always have a specific theme that we zero in on. And like that, we create this perfect balance between having a place to come to and work out, like working on our skill set, strengthening our skill set, and doing some, technical exercises, while at the same time, like tonight, having some fun where we can look at either fun, beautiful pigs or at some gorgeous, we had hedgehogs and beautiful deer. And we don't just draw animals, we also draw people, of course, and they're always gorgeous to look at as well. And sometimes we just draw boxes and we make that fun. So it's kind of a playground slash gym for artists. And if you want to make sure you get the most out of the session, I recommend you do this. Find the biggest screen and put this stream on the biggest screen in your house, because like that you can see the reference material nice and big, which will make it easier to draw from. And that leads to the second thing, you want to draw along. So I designed these sessions not just for you to kick back and munch on some chips and watch and, just kind of let it all flow through you. You'll only retain 5% of the evening. Instead, have your sketchbook, have your scrap pieces of paper and ballpoint pen if you don't have anything official, and draw along. And that's the cool thing about this format. If this was a real life class, you couldn't just hit the pause button on me. You couldn't wind back. You couldn't come back to a pose later on. But here you can. So you're in control of I want to draw this pose a little bit longer. And, you hit the pause button, or you just follow along in real life time and see where that pacing takes you. So draw along with us, have questions, pop them into the chat, and really engage. And like that, you'll really benefit from this lesson. So with that, oh, hey, so nice to see you in the stream. Oh, I think your first name Fernanda? Can't remember. But it's so nice to see you pop up over there. So what we'll do tonight is we will focus on separating value and light, and I'm really understanding what the difference between the two is, why it's important to understand those two principles as two separate entities. Yes, they're connected, and we'll get to that, but it's useful to understand them as separate, because then we can be more in control of our drawing, feel less overwhelmed, and also then when we understand how value is different from light, then we can arrange our marks in a way that will clarify our drawings rather than confuse our drawings. So that's the goal for the evening. Yes, I am doing well. I hope, right back at you. I hope you're doing well too. Thank you. All right, so let's begin with some terminology and defining that. And then I will show you something on my drawing pad. And then we'll get into 1 hour of pig footage. How does that sound? Okay, so let's define what is the difference between value and light. Now let's begin with light. We need light to see value. And value is constituted out of two things: the color of something that it inherently has, like over here I have two balls. See, this ball is inherently white. It's the pigment of the ball is white. And then here I have a ball that's like a darker gray. So the inherent pigment, the inherent value of this is like a middle gray. So both of these have different values from each other. And we call that, so here's a fancy artist's word for you to remember. We call this local value or local color. Like if these were in white and gray, if these were red and green, we'd say the local color is different. So I want you to remember this word, local value. This is the value that exists regardless of the lighting situation. Like if we turn off all the lights in here, these two things will still have two different values. Of course, because we have these two jelly orbs in our skull, we only see with them if there is light. So if you want to get really technical about it, you can't have one without the other. But it's useful to mentally separate them out. So let's say we have these two beautiful, differently valued spheres. We turn on some lights, and then what happens is we have a separation between the parts of the balls that get hit by the light, which is a true light mass, and then there will be parts of the balls that won't get hit by the light, and we call those the shadow mass. And the light mass and the shadow mass, they usually have two different values. So value, you can think of it as degrees of lightness and darkness. Just how these two have different degrees of lightness and darkness, if you then look at the light mass side of that ball and the shadow mass side of that ball, they will have different degrees of lightness and darkness. So we have local value, and we have light, which separates into light and shadow. And that distinction between shadow patterns and local value is going to be so useful for tonight. There's one more last component that we have to deal with in order to build true value, like 100% value that like reflects all the nuances that are there, and those are called gradations. So let me switch my camera over and I'll show you what that looks like on the page, and then we'll try and absorb all of this into the drawing process. And understanding this will help you organize your drawing process. It'll help you feel more in control. So let me just switch over here. Drawing and screen. Hey, Chris. Glad that you're here. Okay, so up here, I drew 3 circles. Like imagine these are balls. This is my black ball. This is my middle gray ball. And then we have a white ball. That's the inherent pigment. We call that inherent pigment the local value. We will deal with this local value differently than we deal with what's down here. So down here, let me position it right. We have that separation between light mass and shadow mass. And notice we have a shadow on the ball and a shadow that's being cast by the ball, but we consider the whole thing the shadow mass. And then because we have that shadow, because we have this form rolling from being hit directly to being hit less directly and kind of rolling into the shadows, that part becomes a gradation. So I kind of fleshed that out a little bit more over here. We have a strip of paper. I'm imagining the light's coming from this direction. So this part of the paper is being reached by the light very directly. It creates a light mass. And then this part of the paper strip is facing away from the light, creating a shadow mass. And because it's bent in this kind of soft curve, there is a gradation. So if we now, let me see if I can zoom out just a little bit more so you can see it all in one snapshot here. So if we now combine local value with a shadow pattern and then add good gradations onto it, we have a really well-organized plan to get to a full value drawing. Now tonight we won't have time for a really extensive full value drawing, but I just want you to understand this is how it's done. So if you have 2 hours to draw a pig, you could really render it well. Whereas, you know, we'll have 10 minutes or 15 minutes at the end, and so we'll just kind of start to dabble. But again, first you'll address, for me, I usually start with the shadows. There is no right or wrong if you start with local value or shadows. That's truly your personal preference. There are how-to drawing books that begin with a local value and then they add the shadows on top. And then I've seen the reverse in how-to drawing books where they begin with the shadows and then add the local value. You do what seems right to you, but you do begin with these two. And then you add the gradations on the transition. So for example, a transition would be right here, where we gradate from the light mass on the sphere that's being hit directly more gradually into the shadow mass. So last thing I'll tell you before we jump in, aside from now you know, okay, pass 1 is shadows, pass 2 is local value, pass 3 is gradations, I want you to know how to move your hand or how to make your marks when you apply or when you work on your values. So when you create local value, I want you to think about creating your marks or making your marks in a flat manner, meaning in a one-directional manner. You can cross hatch, but the goal of your hatching, whether it's one-directional hatching or three directions or even 4 directions, your goal for the local value is to make it look like a flat sheet of paper. No differences. It's all just even. Whereas when you create your gradations, this here, which are happening here, you don't go in this flat way of making your marks. You want to go what's called cross contour. So you want to shade across and over the form. So this is where you have to imagine, what is the form like? How does it curve? And you want to direct your pencil in that way. And like that, your marks are leading us to believe that this has form. For your shadows, just like with the local value, you maintain this kind of one-directional mark making. So when we have this one-directional way of making marks, we call that flat mark making. Some people refer to it as notan. And when we make gradations, wow, this is getting all messy here now. When you create gradations, we call that cross contour. Alrighty. Well, that should get you started with understanding the difference between light and shadow. And again, being aware of the separation is useful to stay out of overwhelm. And then later on, I will have more examples when we look at the pigs, how to make that understanding help your drawings look more clear. The first 10 drawings are just gestures. So there will be 1-minute poses. These are just to warm up. So don't worry about value in those whatsoever. Just warm up your hand and have some fun. And then when we slow down into 5-minute poses, we'll talk about value. So again, right now, the gestures are just a way of kind of arriving back in your drawing mindset. I don't know how your day was, if you've been very busy and you've been solving a lot of problems, and you're finally sitting down to have a moment to yourself. It sometimes takes a while to switch over into your drawing brain. So these gestures here, they're just kind of a gentle, fun way of dipping back into that side of your brain. And aside from warming up, what these gestures are meant to do, gestures are all about making you see the entirety of something. So rather than looking at the pig and its spots and thinking about these individual spots and how there are joints on the legs and how there are bristles on the coat, instead of thinking about those individual parts, a gesture invites you to look at the entirety. And what that means practically, it means you make your eyes zoom out so far that you can see the whole pig in one glance, rather than, scanning from one part to the next. And there are so many different ways of drawing gestures. So most of the times I default into a linear way of capturing gestures where I kind of try and pick up dominant rhythms. But you can draw gestures that are entirely shape-based. Or you can draw gestures that are segment-based. So if this was a figure, you know, we could draw like an oval for the hips and an oval for the rib cage, and then like have sticks for the legs. So here, if you were here for last week's foreshortening lesson, same thing. We begin with a butt, we go to the middle, we go to the front. And we're kind of paying attention to how those elements stack up in front of each other. Now, another thing that gestures are really great for in a kind of an infuriating way is they help you figure out if your pencil paper combo is working out for you. If you have a nice combo, your marks will feel like they're flowing nicely over the page. And if you have a combo that doesn't work so well, it'll feel like you're scraping across the paper. And it's gonna feel annoying. Or rather than scraping and kind of feeling like you're getting slowed down, it might feel too slick. You might feel like you're just sliding and you don't have any control. And so when that's the case, you can, if you have different tools nearby, you can switch it up. Say, okay, this one is too slippery. Let me find something that has more grit. So maybe pick up a pencil that has a more powdery quality. If you don't have anything else nearby, just kind of acknowledge, okay, this is not a great combination. I'll make it work. Okay, so here we have 3 minutes because there are 3 piglets. I've noticed that these 1 minutes, they're really rushing by fast. So a question you can ask yourself for these gestures is like, if I really had to reduce the shape of this one piglet down, what kind of shape does it remind me of? Does it look like a hot dog shape? Does it look like, I don't know, come up with something, a pizza slice? Does it look like, I don't know, just come up with some other shapes that remind you of the overall shape. And if any of you who are here either live with me or who are watching it later, if you have a pet pig, you'll have to let me know. Because that's just the cutest thing. It was about a year ago, I was sitting in my car with my daughter. We had just gotten back from, I don't know, the store, I think. And I look over to the neighbor's yard and there was this pig by itself on the front lawn, and it was just so bizarre. It was like, you know, like I think it was a potbelly pig because it was like the darker color. It wasn't a pink one, and it just was hanging out, kind of snorting around a little bit, rummaging around, and it saw us and it looked rather pleased that it saw us and came over to say hi. And then about 10 minutes later, it took a long time, 10 minutes later, the family arrived and their pig Peanut had gotten out the gate. So Peanut was out on the loose, and it was just really fun. So if you have a pig, let me know. You'll have to send me a picture. Shift this over here. So gestures, they can be infuriating, not just because of the material not being the right combo, but because, you know, you have such a short amount of time to make an assertion. It's like, I think this is the most simplified version of this pig. And you know what happens when we make quick assertions? Often we're wrong with them. But it's only by making many of them that they eventually get better. Okay, so here we have 3 minutes for this one. I really love this one because it has such a beautiful flow. It's like the most trim looking pig. And the thing, again, about making these quick assertions, like quickly distilling the pose into its simplified version, if you only draw like once a week and only for a couple of minutes, maybe an hour even, you know, it's not going to be that great. And that's fine, but you want to be realistic about it. Like, you get good at those quick assertions if you pretty much do them every day and a lot, you know. And once you have a lot of hours under your belt, they kind of stay okay or good, even if you don't do them every day anymore. But, you know, rather than saying, oh, I just can't draw gestures, I want to caution you of that kind of thinking. It's like, well, you know, it looks the easiest because they can be so simple, but it's one of the hardest things. It's one of the hardest drawing disciplines. So they definitely demand their due. So when I am in a phase of my life where I can do a lot of figure drawing, where I draw the figure every single day, or I have like figure drawing classes every single day, then my gestures are on point as soon as I get into the drawing. These days, you know, I'm a mom and I teach, and so I don't often have just my own practice time. Like, if I have drawing time, I work on my projects that are dear to my heart, and so I don't have like a lot of training time, or not that daily training time. I train with you guys here, and you can tell, you know, but everything comes in phases, and so you don't need to freak out if, you know, your gesture game is not that strong right now. Okay, so this is our first longer pose. I'm gonna be focusing on the pig with the spots, and I'll tell you as I'm drawing the different value and light elements. So if you've been drawing with me, you know that I like to divide the drawing process into 3 main stages. Stage number 1 is the gesture, and we do that lightly if we have a couple more minutes than just 2. Meaning if we have like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, we begin with a light gesture, anything that's erasable. And with that light gesture, we establish the proportions and the placement. Where on the page do I want to place this drawing? How big on the page do I want this drawing to be? And how long are the parts in relationship to each other? Like the leg in relationship to the butt, or the length of the body in relationship to the length of the head. So that is what we're laying out in the gesture. Once we have that, we want to think about the individual segments and create better shapes for them and create better forms for them. And now you'll see really good artists, master artists, they can skip from stage to stage. They don't have to artificially keep them apart as we are. I am artificially separating them out because when you're still learning, that's really the best way of getting better. And once you've fully integrated these lessons into your artistic DNA, you can skip around between phases too. Okay, so I built a little bit of form, meaning I kind of made myself think about, okay, this is cylindrical here. I have the shoulder area, that's its own segment. Here I have this kind of cylindrical midriff. I have the haunches that then go into the legs. And so now I'm going to look for an area where I see the shadow edge really clearly. So I said earlier that I prefer beginning my value assessment with the shadows. So I really see that shadow pattern on the shoulder clearly. There's no ambiguity where the shadow is and where the light is for me. And then I shade in this pattern. Now shadows, this is something I did not mention. So this is something I want you to remember. Shadows rely on strong patterns. Now, that is a statement that can easily kind of go in one ear and out the other. I want you to really hear me on that. Strong shadows rely on strong patterns. And a pattern is not this. This is not a pattern. This is a smudge. It's a field of tone. A pattern has very clear parameters. If you shade this in, that's a clean pattern. And that pattern has to follow the underlying form. I think we did a sketch session on shadow mapping. I think it was a figure one. So I can't remember if I had the rights to leave that one up. Sometimes with the figure drawing sessions, I have to take them down because the models only allow me to stream it live and then leave it up for 2 days and then I have to take it down. But you might want to go through the archive and see if there is one on shadow mapping. I know I did one on local value. We did a portrait one on local value. So you can kind of add that one if you really want to dive deep in this notion of separating lights and shadows and values. Okay, so notice again what I'm doing here. I am beginning with the edge of the shadow and I'm closing the pattern, and then when I draw it, I fill it in a flat way. Okay, let's get to the next one. I'm gonna try and make this one a little bit bigger. Give me just a sec here. There. So here, if we're talking about local value, the local value of this one, sorry, my camera is not focusing. There we go. The overall local value of this pig is darker than of the previous one, especially on the body. The legs are lighter. The legs have a lighter local value. The body has a darker local value. And then it has a very clear light shadow separation. So 5 minutes is not a lot of time, so I have to move somewhat quickly. This phase, I'm establishing just the forms. I'm using here a center line, kind of a cross arc for arranging the eyes. The chin, the cheek. Deciding where the neck anchors into the chest. Okay, so I got my underdrawing established, and now I can seek out areas where I see that shadow separation. I see a very clear shadow inside of the ear here, so that's kind of an easy place to begin at. I have the cast shadow here. And then I'm going to look around the left edge of the head. So here it has these lashes. And then right around here, the nose rolls into shadow. All of the muzzle is being hit by light. This is all hit by light. The chin, I'm going to treat it as if it's in shadow. So the entire left side of that pig is in shadow. See how my marks, when I shade in that shadow, they're going in one direction. I'm not going in all different directions. I'm just going from the top right to the bottom left, creating one simple tone. And if I have time, I'll show you how I imply now the difference between the dark local value of the leg here and the lighter local value of the foreleg. And so basically all I'm doing is I'm making another pass over the areas that have the darker local value. But I don't change the direction of my marks. I'm just shading over it one more time. What happens when you shade, you see these little snags. You want to either erase them out or you want to recontain them, because again, the shadows need to have a really clean pattern. And so you can tell now a little bit, okay, this is darker, this is lighter, this is still shadow because I shaded it. Okay. I'm going to try a different pencil for this one. So we have 10 minutes. So again, I can rush a little bit less to establish my underdrawing. So I'm placing my head shape roughly. I'm placing the shoulders, the rib cage, the butt, and again, the underdrawing goes lightly. And so you can already kind of see the value variation happening on this pig. So overall, this pig has a lighter local value. So it's a lighter pigmented skin than the one we just had earlier. But it's being a little piggy and it's rolling around in the mud, or has been. And that mud, wherever it's caked on, gives us a darker local value. And then there's a clear shadow pattern on this pig too. Oops. So first I'm beginning and thinking about the form. So the form of this pig's head is egg-like. So I'm going to think about that as I'm drawing these parts. Becoming a bit more specific about the shape of some of these parts. Here I drew that center line so it helps me arrange the features. I drew this across line for the brow. Helps me place the eyes and not make them look like they don't belong to each other. But I need to kind of remind myself not to get too sucked into details. It's super tempting to want to make this a pretty drawing. But these are workout drawings. They're not, most of the times, they're not pretty. And so I need to move along so I can get to a place in certain parts where I can run through capturing shadows, capturing local value, and maybe gradations. I don't know if I can get to gradations in 10 minutes, but so I talk about this a lot, but especially if you haven't drawn with me before, I'm going to say it again. I think it's very important that we have a place where we allow ourselves to draw shitty drawings, and not just shitty drawings for the sake of, you know, making a bad drawing, but for the sake of practicing something that we're not good at, so we can get better at it. So in these sketch sessions, you know, we're not in the same room together. You don't have to be embarrassed about if the drawings don't turn out. The only person that's going to judge you is yourself. So I want you to be nice to yourself. Not nice and blow smoke up your ass, but nice in terms of like being honest and giving yourself some grace to study and practice. So if the drawings don't turn out the way you want them to, rather than beating yourself up, you get very clear about, okay, what didn't work? What do I not like about it? And most of the times we'll just want to say, well, I don't know, it just sucks, and then run away. So don't let yourself run away and just kind of judge it as it sucks. Dig in, compare what your drawings look like with somebody's drawings who you admire, not to fawn over them, saying, oh, they're so good, and oh, how great, and look how sucky mine is, but to put your analysis hat on and then compare yours to theirs and ask yourself, okay, what kind of marks do they make? Where do they put accents? What makes their drawing look three-dimensional if they have those kind of three-dimensional drawings? What makes their drawings look so rich in value and contrast? Am I doing this? So that is what I want you to do if your practice sessions leave you feeling a little bit, I don't know, deflated. So again, don't be your worst critic, be your best cheerleader. And I make these sessions so you can grow and so you have a safe place to do so. Okay, so coming back to the lesson, I always have to get on the soapbox. So here's what I'm doing. I'm finding the edges of the shadow pattern. And in this, it's pretty easy to see whatever is more pinkish is being hit by light. Whatever is more grayish or brownish, more neutral colored is in shadow. And so I begin by establishing my shadow patterns. And I don't do this. So look, if you can, I don't just begin randomly and start shading. So if you've been doing that, I want you to stop. I want you to begin by finding where's the edge of that shadow pattern. Decide what kind of an edge this pattern needs, and close your pattern all the way around. So you have now a fully enclosed pattern. Then you shade it in one direction. And then you move to the next form. So every form will have its own shadow pattern, most likely. And you begin with the edges of that shadow pattern. And then once you have that, you've addressed all the shadows. Didn't address this cute little tail, but I'll have to let it go. You deal with any important local value shifts. So I really liked how dirty that back leg is. So I'm going to come back here. And again, just in a one-directional way. Create this caked on dirt. I'm also kind of changing the edge here a little bit more. See that edge is a little bit more textured to imply that this is something different. And then you can do that with any other areas that kind of stood out to you. So here under the chin, you have a darker value because of the light logic there. So the light doesn't, there's no bounce light getting into that neck area. So if you're thinking, well, what the hell is a bounce light? That means in the shadows are often degrees of lightness and darkness too. And the lighter parts of the shadows are those that have a lot of what's called reflected light. So light rays will travel, let's say, and hit the mud and then reflect back up into the shadows. It won't be as bright as any of the true light masses, but there will be a variation. In general, you're better served ignoring the variation in the shadows and rather focusing on the variation of value in the light. So if I have enough, oh, I don't have enough time. If I had enough time, I would then start working on the gradations, transitioning from the shadow into the light and dealing with those gradations rather than futzing around with the variations in the shadows. And I see, hold on, give me just 1 second here. Ted, I just saw your comment. Okay, so let's, this one is big enough. And I'm gonna try one more different pencil. I'm gonna try out this China marker that I have. In the last one, we have 15 minutes. So for that one, it's just a portrait. We'll definitely get into combining all three. So if you're thinking, oh man, we only get into shadow patterns and local value a little bit, we barely can get to transitions, I promise you, I'll show you the transitions in the last image. Pinky swear, piggy swear. We're going for puns. Look at those ears. Could sail a boat with those. I switched to a new pad of paper. Usually, especially with figure drawing, I like to work on smooth newsprint. And I went to the art supply store and it got to me. I saw all the different paper types and I thought, oh, how great. I'm going to experiment. I'm going to try out something different. And so I picked a bond paper. And bond paper is not that different from newsprint. It's another kind of inexpensive paper option, but it's not the same. It has a different texture. And what pencils work well on the smooth newsprint don't work so well on my new bond paper. So always something. Now let's bring this down more. I'm looking how the feet align. You see how there's kind of like this diagonal being formed. Okay, this one is over here. So this is my underdrawing. Looks like some weird creature that's not really a pig, but let's make it more pig-like. So now I'm looking more at the individual elements. So here's the brow swooping over here. Now, I'm cycling between different subject matter, from figure to portrait to animals, and not always the same animals, always different animals, because it keeps us on our toes. If we only focus on the figure, we might get better quicker, as in like we might find shorthands quicker that will work well for the figure, and see more pleasing outcomes in that regard. But if you're the kind of artist like me, like I want to be able to draw anything, and especially animals come up in my personal work a lot, so I want to be familiar with what they look like. And so we had one session where we just studied the anatomy of cats and understanding, you know, where the shoulder blades are, and how the hips factor in all different positions. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that even if you don't love drawing pigs, you're still filling your shape library in your drawing brain with interesting shapes. And it gives you an opportunity to decide, well, what is characteristic about this? What kind of form is that? So for the record, the China marker on bond paper feels much better than the other pencils I was using. And one of these days, I will figure out how to put a countdown clock into the corner so we actually know how many minutes are left per pose. That's always something where I'm getting a little bit bummed, because you probably know this too. When you switch into your drawing brain, you lose track of time. And so what seems like, oh, I have plenty of time, all of a sudden time's gone, and you know, you didn't get to demonstrate or practice the part that you set out to practice because you lost track of time. But if we had like this little countdown clock in the corner, we could kind of keep ourselves on track. Or I could keep us on track better. Okay, so I've been paying attention to making these shapes more particular. And as I'm creating the shapes, I'm also thinking about the forms a little bit. So now I'm seeking out areas where I see the light shadow separation. And all of this right side of the body is in shadow. The light's coming from the left. So the clearest place where I see that is right here. So beginning with a shadow edge here. And here's something else in terms of value. You might wonder, well, do I have to stay true to value? As in, like, do I have to, like, if I want to add some of this shading stuff, should I be worried or concerned about building the accurate degree of darkness? Or is there some leeway? And I'm definitely falling on the side of there's a ton of leeway, especially in quick drawings like this. 100% value accuracy, like where you really try like to make the ear the same darkness as the ear on the reference. Like if I cut out this ear and I put it next to my reference, and squint and took the color off out of the reference, they would see the same darkness. That is, it takes a lot of work. And if that is your goal, you need to set yourself up to reach that goal. That means you need to arrange a long pose drawing. So that's what the academies do. That's what those academic drawing atelier studios focus on. They have models hold poses for multiple days, like the same pose. The model keeps coming back to the same pose over and over again. And so they facilitate that. If you only have 5 minutes, 10 minutes, don't worry about it. Instead, be concerned with establishing correct relationships. In relationship to this is darker. In relationship to that, this is lighter. And give yourself permission to accent as needed. Like maybe you need to make it darker in order to add more interest in one place. Okay, so in this one I really only got to the shading, but it turned out pretty cute. So now we have that 15-minute portrait, and I will work on all 3 elements together. So I'm placing where I want the head on my page, how big I want it to be. It's my underdrawing. Starting to get the proportions laid in. I draw erasable. Well, actually with this China marker, you really can't erase them. So, but if it was a regular charcoal, I could erase it. So for symmetry's sake, you see how I marked where the ear comes out of the head. I'm carrying an arc over to the other side, and then I bring the ear out from that. And you can do the same with the ear, like tip of the ear here. And like that, it will feel like they belong together. Like that there is a connection between the two. Let's bring this further down. if you've been drawing along, you might notice that you might have started out rough and choppy, and at one point you might hit your stride and your marks aren't quite as self-conscious anymore. Things are starting to fall into place a little bit more. It might happen, it might not, but sometimes it just takes a while. And sometimes we just don't fall into the rhythm at all, which is sucky. And, you know, we all hate it when that happens. But I think it's useful to think about drawing as your friend, like your creativity is your friend. And we don't want to ask too much of our friends. You know, we want to cherish our friends. We want to treat them super well. We want to make them feel invited and like they can be themselves. And sometimes, you know, our friends, they have bad days. And other times they surprise us with like just amazingness. And I think drawing is just like that. And if we kind of chastise ourselves for bad drawing days, to me, that's like bad mojo. Like, it doesn't make me want to go back to the drawing board next time, and I feel like it leaves a bad taste. Okay, so I'm working on the individual parts. So I have this kind of cone-like snout. Then I have the head, which is like a part of an egg almost. I have the big ears coming out. Let me place the eyes. Again, I use a center line for that. Right in the middle here. I have the ear arc of this ear arc. I can place the eyes here. And with eyes, man, put them down lightly, because often you put them down and then you're like, wrong place. And especially if you're drawing with something like China marker where you can't erase, that's a bummer, you know? So like put them in lightly, then kind of lean back and zoom out to see if it feels okay, and then you can put them in. All right, so I have my underdrawing in a good enough place. I'm gonna begin with my shadows. So if you need help finding your shadows, squint, zoom out, and plot the patterns, but only the ones you see when you squint. So that is really the thing you have to be disciplined about, because what we as beginners want to do is we want to put in all the nuances. And nuances, they have their place, but they're in that gradation phase of the drawing. So they're the most fun and the most satisfying to draw, but you kind of have to bide your time. You have to make sure everything is in place, the shadow patterns are in place, the local values in place, and then you put in the gradations. And then those gradations will make the drawing sing. If you don't do that, if you begin with your gradations, most of the times because people just don't know any better, what will happen is you'll get overwhelmed. You'll get overwhelmed by all the variation. You feel like you just have a hot mess on the page, and it won't look clear. It will just look like a mess. And even if you are able to control the variation, you usually lose clarity if you address all nuances all at once. Okay, so I got my shadow pattern on this area. Let me get that ear. So I'm always doing a lot of squinting. Any value work, you want to squint the hell out of that thing. whether it's a pig, a person, a pair of rollerblades, it doesn't matter. Just squint, 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 and zoom out. And as I'm drawing, or as you're drawing, whichever, if you have questions that pop in your mind, please feel free to ask me. There is a delay, so make sure you get your question in before I say goodbye, because if I don't see it in the chat before I hop off, I can't help you out. But if you put it in early enough, then I can address it before we sign off. Okay, so in this piece, there's not a ton of local value difference. You could argue that the ears are a darker local value than the forehead because the bristles are lighter and the ears have more blood in them. So we could work on that. One directional marks for the areas that you want to look darker. Okay. And so now what I'm going to work on is building some gradation. So we know that this is shadow, right? And then we see like this zone here, that's the mid-tone zone. So mid-tones are the darker parts of the light. And then we have the lighter planes that are being hit by the light most directly. So we can do this easily, not easily, we can do this simply by saying this entire facet is slightly darker. And I'm applying some tone, and I'm thinking about, you know, what's the angle of this facet. So I'm making my marks in line with the angle of this facet. If this was the one that was darker, I would have angled my pencil like this. So that's what I meant when I say cross contour. Now I'm going to work on transitioning out of these form shadows. So the form shadows are there because the form is turning away from the light at this point. And we want to cross contour over them because it helps us transition into the midtone. It also helps us build the illusion that this flat drawing has 3 dimensions. So see, when I go cross contour, I make these marks that kind of look rounded, like they're curving over the form. And this is this edge between midtone and shadow. It's also where you can imply the texture, like the hair. Like you don't want to sit there and draw individual hairs in the shadow. It's a little bit of a waste of your time. But at the edge between light and shadow, that's a good place to put your textures. there's a slight indentation on the forehead. So for that, I can go across contour too. And I can go across contour this way, or I can go across contour that way, or both. But of course, for the areas that are in the light, you really have to control the pressure of your pencil so it doesn't get too dark. Like these marks should not compete with your shadows. So then here we have this ridge, the nasal bone. And again, you want to squint constantly. Squinting, zooming out, and then comparing. What I'm looking at right now, how dark is it compared to other places? And so even though we kind of artificially separated out local value, light and shadow, gradations, once we're in that drawing process, at one point they'll all start to kind of interweave. So you begin with a nice clear shadow mapping. You get your local values started, then you start playing with some gradations, and as you're playing with gradations, you'll realize, oh, I'm losing the darkness of my shadows, or not really losing. It's like now that I have some gradations in place, I realize I need to go darker on my shadows. And so you're constantly kind of going back and forth between them. So here the local value, oops. All right, that was it. Well, that ear I was gonna say is darker. My next pass would be coming back into the eye and playing with those details. So this is nowhere near finished, but you saw me go through the whole cycle. So you saw me begin with a shadow pattern. Think about, is there a local value difference? I start kind of indicating that these ears are darker than the bristles. Flat, no tan shading for those local values. And then I started to work on those zones or midtones, gave them a cross contour shading, and reserved those zones that don't have any, and then kind of worked on those smaller gradations. All right, let me switch on over. Give me just a sec here. Where's my mouse? All right. Well, I hope this was useful. Again, if you have a question, now is the time to pop it into the chat. I'm going to review one more time. We separate local value, which are the pigments of something, from the light shadow separation. And then within the light shadow separation, we want to think about gradations, meaning subtle transitions that happen in between the shadow and the light. We never, I know I don't like the word never with art, but it's not a good idea to begin with the gradations, those subtle nuances. Instead, it's a much better idea to either begin establishing your local values or your shadow patterns first. You pick whatever feels better to you. I like beginning with the shadow patterns first, then doing my local values, and then doing my gradations. And by having it laid out and separated as clearly in your mind, then when you look at a pig and you see, okay, this pig has a big fat spot, a dark spot on its haunches. It's like a darker pigment spot than on the rest of the body. You know how to deal with that. You don't have to confuse it with the shadow, let's say. So it keeps you more organized, and it will keep your drawing be more clear. Keeps you be more clear. That was weird the way I said it, but you know what I mean. And a reminder of your mark making. When you shade in local value, one directional. when you shade in your shadow patterns, you begin with the edges of the pattern, then you shade it in one direction. And only when you deal with nuances, gradations rather, transitions, you go across contour, especially at the form shadow edges. Now again, look at previous videos where we dealt with shadow mapping and local value, just so you can flesh out your understanding even more. I hope you liked this. There was one more thing I wanted to say. Oh yeah, next week we're drawing flowers, blossoms, and bees. So our yard is full of orange blossoms, blood orange blossoms. So I zeroed in on some bees, and we're going to be working on that. And I think we'll be zeroing in on having beautiful line quality, like some precious details, how to pull out details. Hope you'll be part of the fun. If you're not on my email list, get your butt on my email list, because right now you get a super awesome 4-day mini series delivered into your inbox when you sign up about how to start out figure drawing on the right foot. It'll teach you why figure drawing is so powerful, what kind of artists learn or practice figure drawing, how to go about it in the right way, what tools to use, how to set up, where to find models, and then when you're actually drawing, what should you be drawing first, second, third. And there's some beautiful images that you will see, and a workbook that has all the supportive material. So get on my email list. You'll get weekly stories from me that will help you stay engaged in your drawing practice, that will tell you what's coming down the pipes on the YouTube channel, and you'll be always first in line for any goodies that I have. If you liked your drawings, tag me on Instagram. I want to see and give you a virtual high five. And let me see. I see one more comment, but it's overlapped over here. All right. Well, Ted, enjoy your beetles, and I see you guys next week. Take care.